stuffing a burger with the smug arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. "Can you even fight? Or did you just play dress up in the military?" he teased, loud enough for the entire family barbecue to hear. The whole yard went quiet, waiting for my reaction. I just smiled softly, adjusting my grip on my glass, and said, "Only hand to hand. Knives were optional." Chad busted out laughing, shaking his head. "Let me guess, they called you princess?" I looked him dead in the eye, the smile fading from my face, and replied, "Hades." Right behind us at the outdoor bar, an older guest, a highly decorated, retired Navy SEAL, froze. The glass he was holding slipped right out of his hand, shattering loudly against the stone floor. He stared at me, his face completely pale. He knew exactly who I was. "My name is Amber. I'm 27 years old, and after 5 years of active duty, I recently returned home to navigate the quiet waters of civilian life. My family always assumed I worked a safe, boring desk job, typing up supply logs in some air-conditioned office. I never corrected them. The things I actually did overseas weren't meant for casual conversation over Sunday dinner. That brings us to today, our family's annual summer backyard barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal, laughter, and the clinking of ice glasses. It should have been a relaxing afternoon, but then there was my cousin Chad. At 31, Chad was a wealthy real estate agent who wore his arrogance like a badge of honor. He loved being the loudest voice in the yard, constantly bragging about his latest commission or his new sports car. To him, my time in the military was just a bizarre phase, a waste of 5 prime years, where I could have been making money. He saw my quiet nature not as discipline, but as weakness, a perfect target for his fragile ego to crush in front of a crowd. Before we see how he tried to humiliate me, I want to ask you, have you ever had a toxic family member try to minimize your heart? Comment your thoughts below, and tell me the city you're watching from so I can see how far our community reaches. I walked over to the patio table to grab a refill, hoping to avoid the center of attention, but Chad caught my eye and smirked. He was standing by the oversized grill, poking at the steaks with a pair of silver tongs, surrounded by a small audience of our uncles and aunts. "Hey, look, it's our resident warrior," Chad called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Come on over, Amber. Help me out here. Is the grill too hot for you, or did they teach you how to handle a little fire in the filing department?" A few of our relatives chuckled nervously, while others just stared down at their plates. I stopped, holding my glass, and looked at him calmly. "I can handle the heat, Chad," I said softly, keeping my voice even. But Chad wasn't about to let it go. My refusal to get angry only seemed to fuel his desire to provoke me. He leaned aggressively against the grill hood, looking me up and down with total contempt. He decided to push the boundary even further, trying to completely diminish my physical capability in front of everyone we knew. "Can you even fight?" my cousin teased, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "Or did you just play dress up in the military?" The entire yard went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. I smiled slightly, took a slow step forward, and said, "Only hand to hand. Knives were optional." Chad busted out laughing, shaking his head at the uncles as if I was telling a ridiculous joke. "Let me guess." He sneered, crossing his arms. "They called you princess." I looked him dead in the eye, the smile completely fading from my face, and replied, "Hades." The word hung heavily in the warm summer air, sharp and absolute. Chad's mocking grin froze on his face, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process the sudden shift in my demeanor. But before he could utter another snide remark, a loud, violent crash shattered the silence from the patio bar directly behind us. A heavy glass tumbler had slipped from a man's grip, smashing to pieces against the bluestone tile. Everyone whirled around to look. Standing by the bar was Commander Vance, a close friend of my uncle and a highly decorated, retired Navy SEAL. He was a legendary figure in special operations circles, a man who had survived things civilians couldn't even fathom. Right now, his face was completely pale, stripped of all color. He didn't care about the spilled drink or the broken glass at his feet. His piercing eyes were locked entirely on me. The casual, relaxed posture of a backyard guest vanished instantly. Commander Vance snapped into absolute attention, his shoulders squaring and his spine straightening as if he were facing a supreme commander on a battlefield. The entire family watched in utter, breathless confusion. They had spent years treating Vance with the utmost reverence, yet here he was, looking completely stunned, almost intimidated, by the quiet 27-year-old girl they had all dismissed as a mere desk clerk. He stepped over the glass, his eyes never leaving mine. Commander Vance took 2 heavy steps toward the grill, his booming voice cutting through the heavy silence of the backyard. He didn't look at the uncles, and he completely ignored my mother's nervous glance from the patio. He looked directly at Chad. "Shut your mouth, son," Vance barked, the absolute authority in his tone causing Chad to step back, his face instantly flushing with embarrassment. Vance then turned to me, his hand rising to a crisp, respectful salute before he lowered it. "I never thought I'd see the day," he murmured, loud enough for the entire family to hear. "Your petty officer, Amber. Callsign, Hades." Chad tried to swallow his panic, clearing his throat nervously. "Commander, come on, it's just Amber. She worked a desk." I said, "Shut up," Vance snapped, turning a fierce glare on my cousin. He looked back at the gathered relatives, who were now staring in absolute shock. "You people have no idea who is standing in your yard right now. In the Joint Special Operations community, Hades isn't a joke. It's a legend." Vance wiped his brow, his voice dropping to a tense, reverent tone as he told a story that was safe for the family, yet chilling. 3 years ago, in a hostile valley, a Tier 1 extraction team was pinned down, completely cut off by enemy fire. We thought they were done for. Then, out of nowhere, the Ghost Network went live. A single phantom operative from an elite shadow unit orchestrated a perfect counter-extraction from the ridges, single-handedly neutralizing the threat from the dark. She was the goddess of the underworld to our enemies. That was Hades. The family slowly turned their heads to look at me, their mouths open in disbelief. The smug, untouchable facade Chad had maintained all afternoon completely evaporated right before our eyes. His face cycled from a deep crimson to a ghostly pale as the weight of Commander Vance's words settled over the backyard. He awkwardly shifted his grip on the silver tongs, trying to force a nervous, trembling laugh to break the agonizing tension. "Wow, okay," Chad muttered, his voice cracking slightly as he looked around the yard for support. "I mean, it was just a joke, right? We're all just teasing here." But nobody was laughing. Commander Vance took a sharp step forward, his eyes boring into my cousin with disgust. "A joke," Vance countered, his voice dripping with pure ice. "You spend your days pushing papers for a commission, boasting about things that don't matter, while she silently held the line so you could sleep safely in your expensive bed. You don't have an ounce of the discipline or true courage it takes to look her in the eye, let alone mock her." A collective gasp rippled through the patio. My aunts and uncles suddenly looked horrified by their own previous giggles, rapidly whispering among themselves and scrambling to look away in shame. The aunts who had ignored me minutes ago were now staring at me with sudden, wide-eyed reverence. Chad stood entirely frozen next to his smoking grill, completely humiliated and utterly stripped of his power, while I calmly raised my glass, took a slow sip, and let the silence finish the job. As the rest of the family slowly dispersed, still whispering in hushed, stunned tones, I walked away from the patio and found a quiet corner near the oak trees at the edge of the property. The heavy tension of the yard faded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves. A moment later, footsteps approached, and Commander Vance stepped up beside me, holding a fresh bottle of water. For a few seconds, we just looked out at the lawn in silence. The fierce, intimidating warrior who had just crushed Chad's ego was gone. In his place was a man who understood the heavy burden of carrying secrets. "I hope I didn't overstep, Amber," Vance said softly, his voice dropping to a genuine, respectful tone. But I couldn't sit there and watch a civilian who has never sacrificed a thing in his life try to diminish what you've done. I shook my head, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Thank you, Commander. Honestly, it was getting a bit old anyway." Vance nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep, Mutual understand. Chad will never understand the isolation of coming back, he murmured. But your brothers and sisters out there know exactly who you are, Hades. Never forget that. His validation washed over me, instantly melting away the frustration of the afternoon. Returning to civilian life was hard, but finding a fellow warrior reminded me of my true strength. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn, the entire dynamic of the family barbecue had permanently flipped. Chad spent the rest of the evening completely isolated by his grill, frantically trying to pack up his gear while avoiding everyone's gaze. Nobody was asking him about his real estate commissions or his new car anymore. His loud, bullying presence had been completely neutralized. Meanwhile, my aunts and uncles took turns quietly approaching my chair, awkwardly offering clumsy apologies and showering me with a sudden, deep-seated respect. I didn't care about their newfound praise or the family clout, but I thoroughly enjoyed the absolute peace that had finally settled over the yard. This afternoon wasn't about showing off. It was a powerful reminder that the strongest people in any room are usually the ones who feel absolutely no need to shout about it. True strength doesn't need to bark from behind a smoking grill. It waits quietly in the shadows until it's needed. If you were in my position, would you have kept your secret, or would you have let Commander Vance expose the truth to put a bully in his place? Let me know your thoughts in the other incredible revenge and justice stories on your screen that our community loves. Click on one of them right now